talk about how we met. You were my physician, but just talk a little bit about how working with patients over all these years has shaped you as well as shaping your approach.
Well, I'd say it's humbling. First of all, when you come out of medical school and you've been a chief resident in a big-time residency, you think you know everything, and your ears are closed for the most part. And then, stuff happens, and you realize that. Well, one little brief story. After I had my liver transplant, I had to leave quite suddenly to go to North Carolina to get the transplant. It meant that I had to leave before I even had a chance to really say goodbye to my colleagues, let alone to my patients. So a letter was sent out, and about a month after the transplant, the area supervisor, Linda Sutherland, had collected letters that patients had sent. And these were unsolicited. They just knew that I had suddenly become ill very critically. And what the letters said was truly humbling. And mainly what they said, once in a while I made a smart diagnosis or smart medication, but mostly it was about listening, non-judgmental listening. Looking back, I don't think that I was as good at that as I might have been, and nor did I realize the importance of it. Nurses taught me a lot about that. Laura Stanley, Beth Beaumont, and others that I was with for 20 years in some cases. I think in a general sense, being humble that there's more to learn than you already know after you've been to Harvard and Dartmouth and Hopkins and all these other places. This is a kind of arrogance of learning that blocks further learning, I think. I also began to accumulate a number of powerful experiences outside of my office relationship with patients that, gave me perspective. Working with the Soviet Union and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War and the Trust Through Health organization that we built up. Some of my mentors that I met in the course of that, Julius Richmond was a powerful mentor for me. He was an assistant Secretary of Health and Surgeon General, the first one that did smoking and the care for children.
Let's just go back on a little personal side, because as you well know, we met as patient and physician. And I wonder what you remember about how our relationship started and sort of how it's evolved over time.
Detroit Tigers and the Black American League that you knew. I was amazed at the depth of knowledge that you had, detailed knowledge there.
So when Dick and I also attended First Unitarian Universalist Society of Newton, or Fusen. I think that's really where we got to know each other more deeply, to have some of the philosophical conversations. So just talk a little bit about that and about how Fusen has been such an important part of your life, Lynn's life.
Well, there are two things there. I first want to express my gratitude to having the opportunity to work with you around issues of racism. That's been profoundly opening for me, and through some of the people that we've worked with, it's changed me. Fusen is, I grew up in a congregational church. My sister is now a congregational minister, and she kind of rues the fact that both Fred and I have not doctrinaire UCC people. I kind of didn't see any need for the church for many years. But when 9/11 happened, that was another major turning point for me. And I really saw a need for community and the a vehicle or a space to share thinking about that. And I was really hoping to find a spiritual leader. I thought Barack Obama might be that person for a long time. Maybe he could have been. That could heal. So I was open to, I've always been open to Unitarian principles. And I'd been to the church here with my neighbor several times. But it was really 9/11 when I decided, and I think Lynn decided. I remember when 9/11 happened. We happened to be in Hawaii, and the whole state of Hawaii mobilized militarily, and there's a lot of military on Hawaii. The Marine base was, just planes flying all around. The airspace was shut down. It was really a time of a perceived crisis and fragility. My brother would have did interpret that in another way. He was very much of a Buddhist in his approach to life. And he sent me a quote just a couple of weeks ago by Pema Chodron, a Buddhist author, about 9/11, where the gist of it was that people were so panicked and felt groundless at that time. And then they realized that the only really meaningful thing was kindness, with being kind. And that those two things went together. If you really relaxed into the groundlessness, you could see what was important between human beings. So 9/11 was certainly a major opportunity. I also was attracted by the social action agenda, and that's always been the thing at Fusion that's attracted me, and that I've been, most involved with, and that I have sometimes felt could be done better, as you have discussed. I think that our conversations did change things to some extent. The way that the Black Lives Matter got expressed finally, for example. Or the current effort for providing housing for asylum seekers, which is going better. Or the criminal justice reform and the work in the prisons on parenting. Those things have helped me to grow in ways and to open doors that I didn't know existed. So I've definitely appreciated that. I also have a lot of very close friends now at Fusion. My sons kind of marvel that somehow I've become a churchgoer, or my brother did, because I wasn't always that way at all. But it's the community and the social action agenda that draws me in and keeps me there.
I think one of the great things about you, Dick, is you are truly a lifelong learner, which many claim to be, many are not. There's a saying, I think it's William James says, many people think they're changing their minds when they're simply rearranging their prejudices. And you are obviously both a teacher and a learner lifelong. And I want to take you back specifically, because we had many conversations around race and racism that I think changed you and also changed me and a number of others within Fusion. But in particular, the opportunity to teach together, to teach around healthcare cultural competence was really profound for me. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about that collaboration.
I'm grateful for that. And, I kind of looked at your proposal as something I might learn from. I wasn't sure how much good I could do or whether my experience could really make a difference. But I found it very easy to teach with you. You had such a sound basic knowledge, and wherever the conversation led, you had resources. And I found that often that I had experiences that complemented that. I remember talking about the the guy at the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center who was just overtly racist, and how much that troubled me, and the action that I took there. It led me to a lot of reading. I've done a lot more reading in the last 3 to 5 years, particularly some of the good black fiction writers.
But let me take you back to the Brockton overt racist, because I think the story of what went on and how you handled it would be very useful. It not only reflects who you are, but what others can do when they're confronted with situations they don't necessarily expect or plan for.
Well, this is a young man from Whitman, which is my hometown. So already he was coming from where I grew up, and I guess I wanted him to behave appropriately, and right from the get-go he was inappropriate. He appeared at the desk in a very demanding and entitled way, and refused to converse with the black attendant at the desk. Well, there were people like that, and the staff kind of raised their eyebrows, but let him do that. And he finally kept making more and more egregious demands on the staff, and openly insulting them. And it finally I was, in a place in the exam rooms, in and out, and I could watch this happening over 15 or 20 minutes. It just finally, I blew my stack, and I confronted him and told him that this kind of behavior was not welcome here, and that he could find his health care elsewhere. If he wanted to complain about it, he could go and talk to the administrator of the clinic. I was very confident because I knew the administrator of the clinic, and I knew that, and I'd been, actually the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center was a special passion of mine because it was in my hometown, and because it was, when I first started working there, we were working in a trailer. So there were only like 2 docs and a couple of nurses. And subsequently, it's blossomed into one of the largest and fastest growing health centers in the country, with a very diverse staff and treating a lot of different cultures. Very rich place to work. Would have been fun for you and I to work there. So because I'd been there early, I got to be on the planning committee. There was a guy from Whitman who had been the commissioner of health in the state, David something, whom I had known a bit, a social worker, and a group from a small group who were going to design the vision for the whole place. That is what excites me. I was similarly involved at Harvard Vanguard and other places in that kind of thing. I love to kind of brainstorm ideas. I'm a little less good at the detailed follow-up and implementation, but I love the blue sky. So I felt it kind of like Brockton Neighborhood Health Center was my child in a sense. I was one of many. So I really didn't want to see it disrespected in the way that this guy was doing.
So speaking of your blue sky and then partnering with others to get the ground built and so on, which I think is similar between us, one of the ways that I really enjoyed collaborating with you was on the forgiveness and reconciliation process, and you were in on that from the beginning. We really spoke about bringing Myrtle in. It was a place where, really the first place that I worked with both Lynn and you together. I just wonder, talk a little bit about how that came about and what you grew through it and so forth.
Well, the issue of ecumenical approach to things really appealed to me, especially with the anti-Muslim fervor that happened, 6 or 8 years ago. My son was writing and researching about it, and here it was right in front of me. So I wanted to get to know some of the leaders in the Muslim community and other religions. So I embraced the opportunity to join the Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries. And then here came this guy, Rodney Peterson. He's a giant, really. And he kept talking about values over violence and working in Roxbury and that just seemed to make so much sense. So I decided I would do the seminar, even though it was a pretty big time commitment. And it all just resonated. I had been interested for several years because I had been pretty close to the genocide in Rwanda, having been there 8 times, I think, and having seen the edges of it. I wasn't there during the actual killings, but I was there just before and soon afterwards, and I could see the impact of it. And so I was very interested in how societies might be able to heal after a breach like that. I had been fascinated by the apartheid and the resolution of apartheid in South Africa and Northern Ireland. I followed very closely. Senator George Mitchell was a Bowdoin graduate and talked a lot about that. We were in small groups with him. So I was really interested in the broader aspects of it, more than the interpersonal aspects of it. But I could see that the people shared deeply and were changed by it. And I could see the potential of it being in schools and in youth groups in Roxbury. That's been one of the saddest things for me that I've had to give up since I've had the recurrence of the cancer. Because I do think there's a great potential in it. And it's led to some really interesting experiences. I don't know whether I told you, Rodney has developed a kind of an activist arm of that, where people work on Saturdays and Sundays to rehab homes in Dorchester and make them possible for black families to live there with dignity. And I did that one Saturday, and I met this wonderful elderly black woman, and we'd been working. We sat and we were eating pizza or something, and I knew that she'd come up from the South, so I asked her what her migration story was. Man, that was so powerful. Everyone in the room was just sitting and listening to this lady. Then at the end, she was from Georgia. I told her that Stacey Adams was running for governor of Georgia, a black woman, and she was very excited.
Yes. Yeah. We're sitting here in Newton, Massachusetts. My wife and I lived here for many years, raised our kids here. When you talk about black politics, I will never forget going the day that Seti Warren was inaugurated as the first black mayor of Newton. And at that moment, we had a black mayor in Seti Warren, we had a black governor in Deval Patrick, and a black president in terms of Barack Obama. And I've often thought, if I'd played that trifecta in Las Vegas 5 years before, I don't know, I'd own Manhattan or something, because it was so incredible to see that alignment. Any of those three are pretty impressive, but the combination of the three was rather astounding. And I wonder, did you have particular feelings when Warren was elected, that Warren as opposed to?
Seti Warren was briefly my patient, and I had an opportunity to point that out to him directly and to express enormous pride in that. I like him very much as a person and as a leader. Maybe didn't do enough for equal housing in Newton, but it was an extraordinary experience, and I was proud that Newton was a part of that.
So you mentioned briefly some of your experience in Africa, and that's a huge part of your life. So just tell me how your connection with Africa began, a little bit about how it's grown into Communities Without Borders and other things.
Well, I've thought a lot about that in recent months. I think that my interest in international stuff and other cultures came from my folks. They were particularly open to people coming into. Whitman was a pretty isolated, lily white community that was not very outward oriented in its politics at all. But the church would sometimes have a Korean minister come in, or somebody from Thailand, or an African, and Mom and Dad would invite them to dinner. I was a very little kid at that time, and I can remember the interest that I had in that. I remember going to my grandfather's house when I was very small, and he had books by Teddy Roosevelt, and his adventures were very attractive then. I was very interested in the small amount of public health we had in medical school, but at that time I was in medical school at Dartmouth. There was a big Peace Corps program there, and Lynn and I I wanted to go in the Peace Corps, but I couldn't get military approval for that. And at that time, there was the threat of going to Vietnam, and I was not going to go to Vietnam under any circumstances. I was sufficiently activated by that time. So a lot of those people, the Peace Corps volunteers, in their aspirations and the stuff they were learning was of interest to me. And that kind of all got put away for the next 10 years when I was in practice, and heavily involved not only in the practice but also in the role that Harvard Vanguard, Harvard Community Health Plan was playing in the community. Then the health plan offered a mini sabbatical, you might remember, which allowed me to go to practice. I negotiated that I could continue to practice half-time and go to the Harvard School of Public Health for half-time. That was what really got me interested, because I met many, many folks from Africa, and I really wanted to go there. One of my patients, Don Shepard, by that time was on the faculty at the Harvard School of Public Health, and he did a number of international consultations, and he needed people with medical background. He's an economist. So he invited me to go to what was Zaire at that time, Congo, Brazzaville. No, Congo, Kinshasa. And that was an eye-opening experience. One of the things that I remember from that is riding in the back of a truck, a broken down old truck. We're doing immunization clinics and things. And these guys were poor as church mice. I mean, they had ripped backs. And they're singing in the back of the truck. And just, you know, there was a kind of a spirit that I caught there. And that's when I caught it. And it kind of never let me go. Then I had a chance to work at WHO and do a number of other consultations. And so that's kind of how it began. Also, I think I've mentioned before, Lynn and I have intentionally hosted people from around the world for now 40 years. I think we counted about 35 different people, some of them staying for 3 years, some of them with their son or small family, but most of them as students, most of them at the School of Public Health at Harvard. So I had a lot of daily experience. One of my friends from Tanzania taught me Swahili while he lived here, for example. And you know, then I eventually got to visit his home in Dar es Salaam. And I met his wife and his family. And I've just found that working with young African professionals, particularly public health professionals, they had such a sincere desire to better their people in their place through sensible scientific methods. I just thoroughly enjoyed, I don't think I ever met a guy that I didn't enjoy meeting and getting to know and working with. And they were, you know, always so grateful, and you know, sure, there's a lot of violence, and you had to steer clear. Well, when I left WHO, there was an open rebellion in the French Congo, Brazzaville, with fighting and massacres and election disputes. So I actually left Brazzaville in a hail of bullets, if you will. I was put in a hotel the night before the flight, and there were bullets going all around. Another time I befriended the son of one of the WHO reps, and we'd gone for walks in the morning, and I went one morning to walk with him, and I learned that the place where we'd been walking had been bombed by, this was in Rwanda, by the opposition, by Hutus. So there was violence, and you did have to be aware of that. And we often said that the biggest public health problem on the continent at the time that I was there was violence. But still, there was so much potential and so much goodwill and so much good stuff happening that I just was really drawn to that. And I could be quite inventive. We had this relationship with the Soviet Unions through the International Physicians of the Prevention of Nuclear War, and they had a system of low-level communication satellites. And we negotiated with them, and they allowed us to use their satellites for communication, WHO communication. At that time, it was not like the internet we have today. It was really technically difficult. But a guy named Charlie Clements came over from IPPNW and helped me to establish the antenna on top of the administrative building there. And we fussed with it and got it working, and it was the prototype for the computerization of the whole place. Before that, it took 3 days to make a telephone call to the next country. That was even in my time.
Yeah. So Dick, part of what I love about your stories is how you see the power of something small leading to huge change, where there's change in your life, your experience with having students here, or changes like that technological shift that you were a part of. And clearly one of the huge changes that you've been a part of is Communities Without Borders. So I would love to just have you talk a little bit about how that started from your vision to where it is now and where you see it going after you leave.
It has become a really important part of my life, and I think if I look back at what I've done, one of the things I really think it was of value, and I'm proud of it. I had, after I was in WHO, I had, by that time, a number of contacts, and Don Shepard continued to be a mentor for me. And Zambia needed a consultant for developing a 3-year plan for the fight against AIDS and malaria and sexually transmitted diseases. Those three were bunched together. And that went very, very well. We raised $150 million from various donors. For the first time, that plan involved grassroots organizations. Prior to then, most public health in Africa was top-down and hierarchical. But and it was my job to find out what these grassroots organizations were doing and how they might contribute more in the next 3-5 years. So I met with about 45 of them over the course of a month or so. And some of them really doing remarkable stuff. And on the plane on the way back, I'd been exposed to a concept of jumelage, or twinning, while I was at WHO. And I thought, why couldn't we just, twin some of these very meritorious NGOs, local grassroots organizations, with organizations back home? So I toyed with the idea for a while. And at that time, I had a very bright African-American Princeton grad who was the resident that I was working with. I used to take her out to Brockton so she could see the community health center. And she finally said, Dr. Beale, why don't you just do it? Stop talking about it. So that stopped me, and I did it. And I got together with Pete Smith and Al Jacobson and some others, and we did first a connection with the health centers, Watertown and Brockton, and then Fusion, and then it got up to about 9 or 10 different churches and institutions. And it didn't work out exactly the way that I had envisioned, but it worked out very well, and in the end it has enabled some form of education for thousands of children from the ghetto, from the squatter compounds, who wouldn't have otherwise had it. And sometimes there are really very concrete ways that feedback has come. On Christmas night, I got a call. I could tell it was from Africa, and an accented voice. It said, I'm just one of the people that was helped by Communities Without Borders, and now I've gotten through school, I have a job, I have a wife, I have a life, and I really attribute a lot of that to the help that Communities Without Borders had. So that's one. And, we haven't been able to do nearly what we'd like to do in most cases. And there have been a lot of failures. It's been an exercise in patience. But it has had a measurable good, and it's also had a big influence on a lot of the young people that we've taken with us. Now those young people, some of them are coming back into the organization with still a lot of enthusiasm. That's the hope for the future. So as far as the future goes, I think that is of some question and concern, because we're pretty small scale, small budget, and dependent on the generosity.
I think one of the patterns that I really observed in all my working with you is the sense of teamwork, a deep sense of humility that goes alongside of pride. When you talk with Communities Without Borders, it's clearly something you're very, very proud of, but there's still a humility as well, a sense that, well, there's much more that we could do, and so forth. And when I go all the way back to when you were my physician, the way you worked with your team, it really felt like a sense of team, not like there was a hierarchy that we often see within clinicians. Well, I'm the doctor, and you're the nurse, and you're the medical assistant, and whatever. So just talk a little bit about how teamwork and collaboration has worked for you in different settings.
That, again, is something that I've learned over time, and which I've come to espouse to medical students very strongly. I think when I was younger, you thought about the doc kind of like the Marlboro Man, doing everything by themselves. That's not the way it is anywhere in medicine now. You've got to work, you're compelled to work as a team. And so if you come with that consciousness and that you're going to learn from teammates, that's, you're better off. I learned a lot about teamwork from the nurse practitioners I worked with, particularly early on. Susan Bennett in Cambridge was one of the earliest nurse practitioners. She testified before Congress to get some of the national legislation going, and was kind of the spearhead. And she recruited a bunch of people who were not only highly competent and sensitive, but also really given to the idea of a team approach. It's not the way it is all the way around the country. In Michigan, nurses work much more independently from physicians. I had time to explore that for a while. But learning teamwork, I think sports teams helped me to do that along the way. The teamwork involved with Communities Without Borders has been enormous. I mean, we wouldn't be able to do anything if we tried to do things ourselves. And it's been a process of finding what people can do and then letting them apply that skill. Some very nice examples of that. And also, it's very satisfying to work with others and to see the results of a team effort. Look at the Patriots. the Harvard Community Health Plan used to get Red Auerbach from the Celtics to come and talk to us during their dynasty.
So let me take off of that for a second, because this is something we've talked about. I think it's really interesting. So when the Celtics had a different coach, Doc Rivers, one of the things he emphasized was Ubuntu, and I know that's a very important concept to you. So just tell us a little bit about what the concept is and what it has meant to you.
Yeah, I think Ubuntu is the kind of religious principle or moral principle that underlies most of sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that where we see Catholicism or Adventists or other churches, it's built upon the basis of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is kind of the Martin Buber principle of I-thou relationship. It's the relationship between people is what's sacred in the world. And without other people and without the relationship to other people, there's nothing in the extreme. This is well articulated, especially in the writings of Desmond Tutu. And I've now have a friend in Watertown, Reverend Kapia John Kayoma, who's at the BU School of Religion, who's written 5 books on it. It has implications, really, for all aspects of society. So it means that, you know, if you see somebody that needs help, you help them. And that's what I've experienced in Africa, in hospitality. I've been invited into this most humble little huts for a cup of tea, and so I see that in my brother-in-law, Darius from Sudan. I think it's a really wonderful principle. I think all of us, it's kind of an intuitive way of being that you can come to. You don't have to be African to have it. Now, you asked me that in terms of team spirit. Well, it is. It's community, and it's like everybody in the community is your brother.
One way we've heard Ubuntu described is in the phrase, I am because we are, and we are because I am.
Right.
As you said, there's an individual and community connection, which is not, it's very different from the American individualist, the Marlboro Man kind of idea. And maybe another example of how you've seen it play out in Africa and translate over here.
Yeah, I think the whole phenomenon of community schools is really a manifestation of Ubuntu. As you know, there are ministries of education are often very poorly funded. There are not enough schools for children. There are not enough books. And basically, with the AIDS epidemic particularly, educational accomplishments took a nosedive all over Africa. One of the responses to this were community schools, where people got together to try to provide the best they could of an education. That definitely was a team spirit. The first group that we affiliated with in Zambia was called the Society for Women and AIDS in Zambia, SWAZ. And they had about 300 places around the country of Zambia where they had some sort of a community school. These were usually in the city, in the squatter compounds, these were usually called what? Family support homes. And it was usually a group of about 20 women, unrelated in terms of, biology, who'd come together to try to support the orphans, and mainly it was orphans because there were so many in Zambia, and other vulnerable children for education. This often meant that they tried to provide a feeding at least once a day, with some success and sometimes not. Sometimes the only reason that children would come to school was because there was food there. The teachers were often not trained, fully trained. They may or may not have completed high school themselves. They were often not paid or grossly underpaid, or something even today. It might be something like $15 or $20 a month. And not dependable. So there was a tremendous amount of sacrifice and, working for the principle that these children needed some opportunity, and there is a universal acknowledgement that opportunity comes with education. And it's highly prized there, as opposed to our society where kids could, care if they go to school or not. I think that's a phenomenon that's based on the principle of Ubuntu. Our work has been to try to upgrade these community schools, to provide books, to provide formal training for the teachers. We've sent a number of teachers for training who've now completed and are qualified teachers. To provide shoes for the children, sweaters, pencils, notebooks, those kinds of things. Simple things. And one of the beauties of this is that the high school kids that go with us can easily participate in the teaching program, because the children there want to learn English. It's the lingua franca, if you will, of Zambia. So just listening to a native speaker and interacting is a learning experience for them. And that allows our kids to kind of see and learn about their lives. It's a really rich exchange. Sometimes very disillusioning for the Americans who go, because they have difficulty when they come back, seeing what we have here in Newton schools, and having just come from slums in Lusaka. So that's a very powerful and transformative experience. And many of the kids, the high school kids that have gone with us, have chosen careers that are somewhat idealistic. They go into public health or education. My niece, Aurelia, is now at the Harvard Graduate School of Education studying international education. She and her twin sister have already established a small school in South Sudan, which is their native country. But education is tremendously important and of high value, and that's especially educating girls, and I think you know that. That is said by many development experts as to be the best place to invest a dollar in development of Africa. And we've tried to stress that by emphasizing the role of girls.
One of the things that's been really powerful in the last few months of our conversations is some of your philosophical thoughts. And, I see you really as using the closing chapter of your life to take it into new levels and new explorations. And particularly, I'd just hear you talk a little bit about how your concept of soul has evolved and where you see it right now.
I've never thought very much explicitly about soul, really, until the last few weeks. Of course, I've read a lot of poetry about it. But I think, from my understanding now, is that it is the core of our identity as a person. And while we're born with an identity, it's like a seed that does grow and experiences multiple influences, particularly family and society. But it's still there, and there's always a core of sameness, that I've always been Dick Bale. There's also an aspect of witnessing. I view the soul as a place from which to witness things that happen or that you've done or the choices that you've made in your life. And very much associated with that is some sort of a moral value that's a portion to them. My worry, it's come up just recently, is that maybe I'm fooling myself. I know that I have a personality that's very positive and go for it and encouraging, and I always see the glass as half full and never half empty. So maybe I'm not really, my soul is not really a valid judge of what's happened in my life. Maybe I'm giving myself too many pats on the back, so to speak, when I really should have taken a harder look. Now, there's also an aspect that, and this came up yesterday, as you know, Aaron canvassed the congregation, their interpretations on soul. And one that came up was a kind of an Ubuntu-like aspect, where soul is community, that souls don't exist in isolation. They always depend on relationships with other human beings. And although I hadn't thought about that very much, that rings true to me as well. I think soul is part of what stays on afterwards. Mary Oliver has a line, how we live forever. And it's in others that we live forever, and what influences we've brought to them. And to veer a little bit, I've thought that every time that I have an interaction with another human being, there's an opportunity for growth in both the conversant and myself, and there's an outcome of that interaction that can be positive or can be negative, and we have the ability to condition that, particularly our attitudes and our strength and concentration on listening. And that really the net value of my life has been the integral sum of all of those interactions over years and years of with other people, and whether my balance on the human race has been positive or negative is the sum of each of those interactions. So in a sense, soul is what is related to spirit. Maybe it's difficult to distinguish between them, but that is definitely something that I'm sure is going to follow me. And I've been thinking about a short piece that I might like to have read at the beginning of my memorial service, whatever that will be, particularly for the children, my grandchildren, who will be there to interpret that and to tell them what the essential values are about deep, compassionate listening and non-judgmental and kindness. Those are the two essential items that I would like to be thought of. And I'm sure that there'll be times when my children and grandchildren will have hard times and or celebrations that I'll be there in a way. Of course, I won't be able to hug them or see them or speak to them, but I'll be there. My brother, Fred, felt that very strongly with my dad. That guy over there sitting behind you. And he felt it so strongly that at times he would get chicken skin, which is the Hawaiian term for goose flesh, in the presence. Fred's adopted son died prematurely in his late 30s or early 40s. And Fred felt really badly and retreated into himself. And he went for long walks on the beach and consulted my dad and felt that he could, not only gain strength and perspective, but some sense of consolation from that. That's, very close to the concept of ancestor worship in Africa. I think it's only a step removed. And in Unitarianism, we call it a cloud of witnesses. So I feel quite confident that something is going to come after me, and it's going to be of that nature, and I would like it to be associated with those values and aspirations that I had.
Well, I think so many threads within what you were just saying, but I just want to pick up on one of them, which is the critical role of family in your life. You were talking about this piece really being written for the world, but particularly for your grandchildren. And, who is one who hasn't had kids yet, but is also very deeply family connected. I want you to talk a little bit about how your family has been so central to your life.
I'm struck by the little sign that you once gave me. If I'd known how great-grandchildren were, I'd have had them first. Grandchildren are really wonderful. I have been blessed, and this is something I did want to say on the tape. My sense of gratitude has only increased since I've been sick again. And it's an amazing physical presence that it comes like a flood. And there can be a piece of music that, initiates it. Just for all that I have been given, my family, from this planet, from the teachers and mentors that I've had, especially the good fortune to have met Lynn, my wife. I feel like I don't deserve it. There's a concept of survivor guilt. Why was it me that got this? Why did I survive? Why did I get all this good stuff? And maybe it's the kind of Christian guilt complex that people have. I should have done more with what I was given. But I am so aware of what I've been given, of the beautiful places I've been, of the, mountaintops and kayaking on rivers and sailing and hiking and a lot of that with my children and my close friends. Nature, music. I think I told you that Shira Shapiro has now given me 3 concerts that she's made just for me. And she's played some music that just from the first notes puts me into a state of deep spiritual gratitude. I don't know. It's just amazing. I've had several near-death experiences. I might have mentioned to you before. One, when I was in my late 30s, early 40s, had young kids, I was on the top of a mountain in Colorado, and I got struck by lightning. I was all alone, hiking alone, which you're not supposed to do. And it was a blue sky day. That was the only thunder and bolt of lightning that I could see. And there were, mountain peaks around. I jumped up, electrified literally, and ran down the mountain and didn't talk about it or share it with anybody for, not even Lynn, for a long time. I just didn't know what that was about. Another time I was on a plane, a rickety old African plane off the east coast of Africa, and one of the two engines caught on fire. And people, began crying and, praying and going bananas. And eventually the plane landed and the fire was put out and nobody got hurt. But that was, I considered to be a near-death experience. And I was maybe 50 then, because I was about 50 when I went to Africa. But I didn't react in that way. I reflected on my life, and I felt, extremely grateful for what I'd had. Then another time, after I had a heart attack, the doctors at the Brigham thought it might be a bizarre kind of an embolism from a tumor, because I had been in really good shape. My blood pressure was fine, my cholesterol was 0 practically, and I exercised like a bunny rabbit, and and yet I had a heart attack, and they thought I had an atrial myxoma and an embolus from it, and there was some physical evidence for that, and so the thoracic surgeon came in, and I signed the release for him to operate on my atrial myxoma, in a couple of days. Then they had this third generation new CT scanner, and it turned out not to be an atrial myxoma. But I can remember lying in the scanner, you probably had that experience, it's 20 minutes or so, just thinking, and again being extremely grateful. So the gratitude is not a brand new thing, it's going back some time, but it's now just here in spades. And I can really look at this period of 6 months since my cancer was re-diagnosed as a gift. I never thought I'd hear myself saying that, but it's given me the opportunity to have so many deep conversations. Yesterday, my son Chris from North Carolina had brought up the pictures that we took at Christmas time. You may have seen in the living room. All of our 8 grandchildren were here. Just, well, how can I keep from singing is the song.
Indeed. Indeed, that's a beautiful metaphor. As you know, I'm a cancer survivor as well and lost a sister to cancer. And when people say cancer is a gift, I say, no, cancer is not a gift. Cancer killed my sister, could have killed me. But the opportunity to live after cancer, that is an amazing gift. I think one of the things we gain is, as you say, that deep appreciation. To know that tomorrow is never promised us, and each day that we have is so valuable. And now having had this opportunity to come back and to have time knowing that you'll be leaving, but to live that very fully. It reminds me of my only trip to Hawaii. I've only been once, and my sister Barbie had been re-diagnosed with cancer. There was going to be no miracle recovery. And 5 out of the 7 of us went to Hawaii together, which she loved Hawaii. And what was so large a blessing, which reminds me of you speaking about the conversations, we could focus first just on being together, and then on being in paradise, which is what I consider Hawaii to be in many ways, and then only then have to say, and we're saying goodbye. And she, like you, to me, had such a positive, healing spirit that it really made for a remarkable visit. And I loved it when you said that emotion can wash over you like an ocean or like rain. It's truly remarkable.
So it can just be a little thing like sitting in the living room and listening to music with Lynn, or going for a walk, you know, on a warmer day. It's just, this life and this planet have just been so good to me.
You know, I think as you speak about gratitude, it'd be just talk a little bit about the folks who've shown gratitude for what you've brought to them. You spoke a little bit about your patients, but I know you've touched so many people in so many different ways, and this passage, this final chapter has given people an opportunity to reach out and share with you, to share with your brothers. So just a little bit about how you've seen those things coming.
Well, my immediate reaction was a young Bowdoin graduate, Lonnie Hackett, who graduated about 4 years ago now. And he really wanted to go to Zambia and learn about AIDS and make a difference. And so he had that opportunity, and he went back, and he went back, and he went back. He's lived most of the last 4 years in Zambia between getting a international health, public health degree from Oxford. And he's established an organization himself now that is very successful, where he imparts community health worker skills to teachers in the classroom. And this has been really embraced by government in Zambia, by the public health establishment. He's made a contribution. He interfaced with 50,000 children last year. It's a model that could expand to the entire country and maybe to other countries. And, you know, he attributes a lot of that initial mentoring to me. I'm so humbled by that. It's such a privilege to have found, and there are others as well, but he's the really outstanding example of kind of feedback about working with others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned to me in another conversation about, I believe it's nieces of yours who you were not intentionally mentoring in any way, not in any formal structure, but they've seen a great deal of their development coming from your more informal.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me, actually. I really respect these two young ladies. They're identical twins, African American, literally. My father is really black, Sudanese man, and mother is my sister. So they've experienced a lot of the stuff about, shades of black and navigating blackness, and have experienced some overt racism at times. But they're extraordinarily talented and intelligent young women. And each of them has written me a letter independently about the influence of my example. And here I didn't think they were watching, But they're off. Really has been to South Sudan 3 times now, despite the fact that it's a war zone. She probably won't be going back there anytime soon. And, they've already started to work on education in Africa as the key thing. I tried to get them to come to Zambia with me several times. I'd still like to connect you with Geneva, who's at Northwestern now in a doctoral program in psychology. And Aurelia is now in Boston, and she's serving on our board at Communities Without Borders. So this is one of the young people that I've intentionally tried to get attracted. Aurelia will probably lead one of the trips with the kids. She's done this already 3 or 4 times to China and various places. She is going to be fantastic in whatever way she contributes to the organization. And I'm so delighted to have them as nieces. So is my brother Fred. It's just so many blessings out there.
My own work around cultural competence, connecting people from diverse cultures, helping them work with and for each other, is obviously one of the things that's really blessed and connected us. And one way that we think about who are culturally fluent leaders, I'd say you're certainly one, you have to be culturally competent enough to be really aware of your own biases, your own limits, a real deep sense of identity, as you said, self-awareness, and then skills, that ability to listen well, to lead well, to really connect in a compassionate way with people. Knowledge, because we don't have knowledge of specific cultures and so on, we really can't respect or work with them. Your point about groups in Zambia, that without their knowledge, your work simply couldn't happen. But I think one of the things that you have more than so many others is the openness to encounters for people from different cultures, whether it's simply a conversation at the clinic or whether it's having someone staying in your home for a time. And the last thing, which in some ways is as important as the awareness, is the desire. There are people who go through training because they're required to go through training. There are people who go for education because they really want it. Those all make for a culturally competent individual. What takes a leader like you to the next step is both the behaviors that you demonstrate. So your niece is learning from you with no intention, but simply you being who you are, but also the behaviors that you expect from others. And I think part of what I love about how you have lived your whole life, but how your life in particular tends to focus as you're going further on, is those behaviors and those expectations. When you mentioned the guy from your own hometown coming in and acting as a racist, and how that simply wasn't tolerable to you, and you're taking action, you're taking the behaviors. That's about both what you're doing and about what your expectations. And I think you leave an incredible legacy to all of us who have known you.
Well, thank you for that, Beau. I do think what you just said about training in cultural competency is not something that is natural. It is a skill set that people can learn and hone and value. I think about the issue in Virginia now and the Governor Northam. What one outcome might have been is that he would agree to lead a kind of a cultural competency effort statewide. That is, that he could say, yes, I did these things and I did have these views as a young person. I think I'm beyond that now, and as a part of my redemption for that, I would like to lead our whole state to look at and introspect about the views that we still hold that are residual and turn over the log and the rock and see what's underneath. Mm-hmm. And this could be done in schools, it could be done in churches, it could be a model for other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. Maybe Virginia is the place where that could happen. And that would amaze Tim Wells, wouldn't it?
It would indeed. We have a dear mutual friend who grew up in very deeply segregated Virginia. Yeah. And yes, to see the phoenix rising from the ashes and becoming a national model would certainly amaze, though thrill him. One of the things that I've had a chance to do, as you know, is to work with Gus White, my mentor. And he'd written a paper on how women and minority patients could avoid receiving unequal treatment. And then he and I wrote a paper together on how clinicians could avoid delivering unequal treatment. We all have unconscious biases, and if we don't address them, they'll come out in unfortunate ways in clinical care. And the paper's been around for some time, and I don't frankly have seen it have much of an impact yet. But as someone who's not been a clinician yourself, but help educate clinicians, how ready are people to really do that work, to see things that have produced negative outcomes through their own behaviors and be willing to change around this?
I think the first years of medical school, maybe the first year is the time to get people. I've, I did, for a number of years, coaching in primary care, where I went over to the medical school once a week for a longer session. And there's now a primary care center at Harvard for the last maybe 8 or 10 years that could undertake that kind of an effort and might be the most appropriate place for it. There's a lot of other agendas that they have, a lot of them related to managing practices and that sort of thing now. But if you could get the agreement of, there are 2 people that are the leaders there, and if you could get buy-in from them, I think that would be the most important place for medical students. I think that it should be done also, that medical students should be interacting with nursing students right from the get-go and not wait until after the postgraduate time and be thrown into a relationship that they're not familiar with. So I would, that would be the most sensible entry point that I could think of for that. And there are a lot more minority students getting into Harvard now and BU, and I think, and I know some of them are very activist and might embrace that kind of an agenda. There's a Department of Medical Sociology that Paul Farmer was in, and Julius Richmond and others, that might be a place a nidus for change. They're pretty much older people. I'm not sure I know too many of them anymore.
So one of the things I've seen in this last chapter of your life is a deepening of all sorts of relationships. I just wonder if you would talk a little bit about how you and Lynn facing this together, how that has evolved your own relationship together.
Well, it's very difficult to talk about the death of a partner, especially since I'm going to be the one that dies, it appears. Well, that didn't happen with my brother Fred. And I feel a real sense that I'm abandoning her. Of course, that's a fantasy kind of thing, but I feel that way. And my single greatest concern is what's going to happen to her after I'm gone. She has a tendency to isolate herself and to blame herself for things that are in no way her responsibility. And she has many skills and qualities that are highly valued by our children, by young mothers. She did parenting groups for young mothers for a long time. But her thrownness is to isolate herself. So I've tried very hard to help her strengthen some of the relationships with people at Fusion now, and that's helpful. I don't know whether she's going to live alone or whether she might go to live with one of our children. She'd be welcome, I think, with any one of the 3 of them. So that's my principal worry. How we have those conversations, there are so many things. Dying is not a straightforward thing. My son yesterday brought up funeral arrangements. He's going to be going to Italy on sabbatical in August, and he's a very busy travel schedule. And so, he wants to know, what are we going to do when Dad dies? And he's been in hospice and declared dead. Who are we going to call? What are your plans for ashes and so forth? We had that conversation yesterday with Lynn, and I thought she was it showed me that she has given a lot of forethought to it and does have plans and some options that she can try out. That conversation made me feel good, and it's one that I've been kind of avoiding. it's drawn us closer, these conversations, for sure. And it's made our time that we have now much sweeter, much more meaningful. Together, in many ways, we've become more isolated because we've just wanted to spend more time with each other. I don't know what's going to happen. One of my concerns, I don't know whether we'll be able to do the hospice here, as we would both like to do. The issue is that I may develop liver failure, which is often characterized by mental status changes and sometimes personality changes and kind of a dementia. I don't want Lynn to experience that, and I don't want to say things in a confused state that would be misinterpreted. So the backup now is the hospice in Waban that I've been talking with has a backup inpatient facility on the reservoir 128. It's a new place. I've been bicycling there many times, and it's a very pretty place. It's only 5 or 6 miles away, so if we have to bail from that plan, we'll probably be to go to that inpatient facility. And I think that would be okay. I like the nurses, the hospice nurses that I've talked with. Another issue is, when do I decide that I need to go into hospice? Right now, today, I feel pretty good. I'd be very happy to go for a walk around Walden Pond or something. But then my status may change, quite quickly. My son last week had documented influenza. If I had gotten that, it could have been a pretty quick lights out pneumonia. So who knows what's around the corner? We have to have, retain a kind of a flexibility about that. We have a lot of good friends and an incredible family, although they're all very busy and, huge responsibilities. I have confidence in my family that they're going to take care of Lynn, and I personally deal with pretty much anything. I've not had any pain to speak of. Early on, I did have some pain that may have been from the capsule being stretched, but now I haven't taken any pain medication for months. I'm blessed by that, and I can have wonderful conversations. I can go to church. I can listen to music. So the quality of my life right now is good. I'm not about to enter hospice, but I may need some help in deciding when to enter hospice. And there's some variation in hospices. Like the pills that I take now for the liver transplant probably could be continued. And maybe the chemotherapy that I'm taking would have to be discontinued, but they're willing to be flexible in the interpretations of that. We're going to put a hospital bed in there, and Chris put up the pictures of our family that were just taken at Christmas right on the wall there. I have a stereo, and I think I'd be perfectly content to die there with Lynn nearby.
Dick, I think one of the things that's truly inspiring about speaking with you like this is your clarity. And I think that's one of those gifts that does come with time. There are old souls. My pastor, Pastor Crowley, is very clearly an old soul. But the wisdom that comes over time and experience and the clarity is remarkable. And I think it is part of that gift of the family and friends that you have nurtured and who have nurtured you, that you have that confidence. And I have to say, it reminds me of my own parents, and they were living in Atlanta. My parents had been in an extended care facility for years. There wasn't really a transition there, but hospice was involved. And it was at a point where my family knew it might be close. I had already been down, but I took my wife and kids, and we went down together for a family visit. And by that point, my mom really wasn't leaving the house, but my dad was. So we took my dad out to lunch, and when we brought him back and he walked into the room where my mom was, they looked like newlyweds. I mean, they just glowed. And that was the last time I saw my parents together. And when it came my mom's time, we were fortunate, as you're talking about, to bring in a hospital bed to my sister's house, which was close by. And all of us took our turns having time to visit. And my mom hadn't spoken in days, maybe weeks. And a friend of the family and I were adjusting the pillows to try and make her more comfortable. And she said as loud and clearly as you would want, "Thank you." And that's the last words I heard from my mother. So I don't know how your final moments will be, but it's clear you'll be surrounded by love. And what more could one ask for than that?
I read the poem When Great Trees Fall on Saturday at my brother's memorial, and Maya Angelou has a line in there about after great souls die, we see with hurtful clarity. And it is kind of a time when you pare away all of the trivial things. But I hope I die with thank you on my lips, like as your mother did.
Indeed. So let me turn it to your side. I've been asking all the questions. Is there something you want to say in this recording before we wrap
We've
up?
really covered, I think, I could have gone on lots of other tangents, but I think we've covered the main things that I wanted to cover. I have concerns about what I'm drafting as a kind of a prayer to be read at my memorial. I've been really concerned about the effect of my illness and death on the small children, and even the larger one. Our oldest is 18, a grandchild, and she's, nobody wants to look death in the face and to think about it afterwards. So I hope I can find some words to say that will be both realistic and reassuring.
Well, I feel confident that the words that you bring will be the right words for your family, and the celebration will be amazing, because that's what your life has been. Your life has truly been amazing and inspirational. I could come up with other words, but we got to stop with those two. I've been fortunate enough to be close to a number of people over the course of my life, and I have only one biological brothers, but I have many brothers like you, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
Oh, thank you, Beau. Thank you for this interview.
Absolutely.
Can I stop crying now?
If I could give you that gift, I would give you the gift to stop crying.